The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Hello and welcome to Squawk Box. Here are your headlines today. ECB President Christine Lagarde plays down the certainty of a soft landing at the central bank's annual forum in Sintra, saying there is not yet sufficient evidence that price pressures have passed.
The strong labour market means that we can take time to gather new information, but we also need to be mindful of the fact that the growth outlook remains uncertain.
Later today, don't miss a CNBC moderated panel with ECB President Christine Lagarde and Fed Chair Jerome Powell. The Supreme Court shields Donald Trump in a landmark decision, giving him broad immunity for official acts and extending the delay over charges he tried to overturn the 2020 election.
Today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent.
Right, the second half of the year, can you believe it? Wall Street started that second half on the front foot whilst Treasury yields rose as traders still weighing up the odds of a Trump presidency. And the French centre and leftist blocs face a deadline to consolidate, urging third-place candidates to withdraw from hundreds of runoffs. This is all, of course, in a bid to block the far right's path to power. We're going to speak to two candidates on CNBC this morning.
And the UK general election campaign, well, it's in its final 2 days then as key parties hammer home their last-minute messages to voters.
ECB President Christine Lagarde has played down expectations for further rate cuts, telling attendees at the ECB forum in Sintra that the central bank will take its time to ensure the risks of above-target inflation have passed. Lagarde also pushed back against suggestions that the risk of a recession has passed.
Given the magnitude of the shock to inflation, a soft landing is not guaranteed. Now, what do I mean by soft landing? I would define that as avoiding either a recession or a major deterioration of employment. If we look at historical rate cycles since 1970, we can see that when major central banks hiked interest rates while energy prices were high, the cost to the economy were usually quite steep. Only around 15%, 1/5, of the successful soft landings in this period have been achieved following energy price shocks.
We have comments crossing this morning from Pierre Wunsch, who is from the National Bank of Belgium. And the ECB's Wunsch saying, barring major negative surprises, ECB has room for a second rate cut. And that's been the big question dangling for markets when the follow-up does come through. Subsequent moves, according to Wunsch, should only come once the ECB has confidence that inflation is moving towards 2%. And I think that's been the issue, that last mile of inflation, just whether the ECB is getting there. Let's get out to Annetta for more. Annetta, the commentary from Christine Lagarde overnight, fascinating, talking about the risks of relying too much on historical data, but also concerns of relying too much on the incoming data as they now try and still make an assessment around whether that final mile of inflation has been conquered.
I think that's a fair summary. I think for them it's really a tricky path because clearly what we had is a structural change of how the economy works in the euro area, and you can't actually compare this inflation spike to previous inflation spikes, and that if you want to learn from past experience and apply the learnings to now, I think this is going to be very tricky, and that's also the opinion of many economists out there. So the key question is whether you dare the risk of further cutting and by that avoid a potential over-engineering, or whether you don't do it. And currently it looks, after this speech of Christine Lagarde yesterday evening here in Sintra, that they rather err on the side of caution. But perhaps we listen in of what the president had to say about the uncertainties.
we are still facing several uncertainties regarding future inflation, especially in terms of how the nexus of profits, wages and productivity will evolve, and whether the economy will be hit by new supply-side shocks. And it will take time for us to gather sufficient data to be certain that the risks of above-target inflation have passed. The strong labour market means that we can take time to gather new information, but we also need to be mindful of the fact that the growth outlook remains uncertain. And all of this underpins our determination to continue to be data-dependent and to take our policy decisions meeting by meetings.
Of course, here on the ground, a lot of talk is also about the French election and what it potentially means to policy making in the euro area, because clearly, at first glance, that doesn't have a lot of effects for monetary policy. But if you think it through and you think about the fiscal component, that could actually mean that there also could come a push for higher inflation. Also, they look at what happens to potential trade policy restrictions when it comes to the US elections. So there are loads of uncertainties for the ECB to set their policy path very stringently also for the next couple of months or for the remainder of the year. But one thing is clear, I think what I actually gathered from yesterday evening's reception is that they are not all on the same page. We've heard from Pierre Wunsch, the Belgian governor, that he sees room for up to 2 rate cuts. Also, the Baltics seem to be quite adamant about the fact that they rather err on the side of cutting rates than on the cautious side. And that is interesting because these economies did have super high inflation, especially from the service sector, but also, of course, from the energy side of things, but now seem to rather look through those effects and want to have lower rates. So and the same holds true for some of the periphery, because they're mainly concerned about what it does to their real estate sector. Commercial real estate is another topic here, because clearly that is also what the Bank of International Settlements said earlier this week. The damages, which are still not revealed in the bank's balance sheets, are not clear. And this could actually be another point the ECB has to look at when they make their mind up about further rate cuts.
And there's a couple of things you haven't really gone into a lot of detail, which I'm fascinated about. It's like there are fiscal problems left, right and centre across Europe, not least the French as well. Surely there must be a bit of pressure coming from the politicians to get the cost of borrowing down, given the horrible fiscal position across a lot of countries. Second point as well is, when are they going to start having to mention and take answers and questions about the transmission protection instruments, i.e. the spread protection as well? Because we've been seeing a little bit of widening out here and there as well. I just wondered if either of those issues were on the agenda.
Not officially, but of course there is talk about that transition, the TPS, to be short. And of course the talk is that it is quite clever actually by the ECB not to set certain criteria, because then the market can actually try, and as we saw that in the case for France, to push yields up, but then essentially those yields might come down by itself. And that's here what I heard on the ground, the rationale. Of course, they stand ready, I guess, and they look at whether there might be a contagion to Italy, and that is probably then the moment when they have to act. For the fiscal space, we're going to talk about that at another time.
Annetta, thank you very much for bringing us the coverage, and we're going to have plenty more from Sintra throughout today's show, starting with an interview at 7:30 CET with ECB board member and Latvia's central bank governor, Martin Kazaks. And our US colleague Sarah Eisen will be hosting a panel at the ECB forum later today discussing global monetary policy with Fed Chair Jerome Powell, ECB President Christine Lagarde and Brazil's central bank governor Roberto Campos Neto.
Yeah, looking forward to Sarah's panel. Right, the US Supreme Court has ruled that this is huge, has ruled that the former President Donald Trump has some immunity from prosecution in his federal election interference case, but rejected his broad immunity claims, as saying Trump has immunity only for his official acts as president. The question is, what is official and what is unofficial? That is where there is an extraordinary amount of debate going on stateside. The ruling, as you would expect, drew criticism, strong criticism from Democrats, with the president, Mr. Biden, calling it a dangerous precedent. NBC's Alice Barr filed this report.
The Supreme Court today setting a new standard for presidential immunity that effectively hands a victory to former President Trump. The High Court ruling the former president is immune from prosecution for official conduct related to his presidential duties while he was in office, though not for personal acts.
The tricky part is what is an official act and what is not an official act, and how are we going to decide it?
The case now heads to a lower court to sort that out, making it highly unlikely Mr. Trump will go to trial before the November election on charges he tried to illegally overturn the 2020 election results, culminating in the January 6 Capitol attack. The former president calling it a big win, while President Biden weighed in tonight.
American people must decide. They want to entrust the president once again, the presidency, to Donald Trump, now knowing he'll be even more emboldened to do whatever he pleases whenever he wants to do it.
The Supreme Court ruling states that a president cannot be prosecuted for actions related to core presidential powers, including Mr. Trump's contacts with Justice Department officials as he sought to reverse the 2020 results, and outlines presumptive immunity for acts on the outer perimeter of official duties, like his discussions with former Vice President Mike Pence. In the majority opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts writing that immunity for official conduct is necessary to safeguard an energetic, independent executive. In a blistering dissent, the three liberal justices said, quote, "The court effectively creates a law-free zone around the president, upsetting the status quo that has existed since the founding." Critically, the ruling not only prevents presidents from being prosecuted for any official acts, it also says that official acts cannot be used as evidence in prosecutions over unofficial acts, and that makes it very difficult to present a case against a president under any circumstances. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Quick look at the Treasuries and where they're currently trading. The 10-year paper, 444. It is not for us to question a Supreme Court ruling. It is just us to look at it and just have experts like Alice in Washington just update us. But it seems extraordinary. It is an extraordinary precedent. My understanding, it updates the previous legal opinion from 1982 regarding Richard Nixon versus Fitzgerald, which was a case against the former president, as he was then, versus his decision to fire an Air Force employee in the White House. Which said it could not be sued for civil damages. But this is now obviously about criminal proceedings. It does go down party lines, there's no doubt about it. As we saw there from the report, Liberals did not like this at all. I'm just going to go for a little bit more and just say what Sotomayor said as well, who of course is one of those Liberals. I just thought this was extraordinary what she said. This is Justice Sonia Sotomayor said, "The president's the most powerful person in the country and the world. When he uses official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he will now be insulated from criminal prosecution." And she's made the point. For instance, and again, you can say this is the Liberal point of view, okay? Orders for the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, question mark, immune. Organise a military coup to hold on to power, question mark, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 immune. That is what Sotomayor had to say, a scathing indictment of the majority verdict.
It's incredible, isn't it? I think anyone who has a view around checks and balances will be looking at this decision thinking it's fairly extraordinary. Why do institutions matter? Well, they matter for the buy-in that you see across communities, across society. They matter for economic performance. There's a lot of evidence gathered from the World Bank, from the IMF, about the strength of institutions and how that does have a very direct link to economic performance. So there is something here. If you look at this decision and you think it has weakened institutions in the United States, then there could be economic consequences, and that's where it gets spiky, I think. Is it just a Trump issue, or is it an issue for any future president now who may go down the pathway of abusing their power? Yeah,
the three arms of power: the executive, the courts, and the politicians via Capitol Hill. It is extraordinary. I would just make one point. A lot of this will have key implications for what has been, for what President Trump did while he was president, and the various cases there. And everyone's obviously casting their eye over the various legal cases against the US president now and seeing which ones were official acts, which ones could be deemed unofficial acts, which parts of those actions, for instance, regarding January 6th, were official. But the problem here is not just what's past, it is what is to come. And what does this mean for the president's actions if he were, the former president's actions, if he is to become the next president of the US? And I think that's where a lot of people have some grave questions.
And we've also seen the grey areas, how you can navigate this by combining some of the official with the unofficial, because then you can't information gather to prosecute. So we've seen the real ramification of how you could navigate this pathway if you were to abuse your power in the White House. And I think it does have huge ramifications from here. But we've got to push on. Let's toss it over to Arabile for what's coming up.
Well, Karen, we're not shying away from the political front, this time to France, though, where opponents to the far-right national rally look to unite ahead of this weekend's second round vote. We'll have the latest as coming up next. Plus, of course, the countdown continues to the UK's general election then, as fresh data shows that annual inflation in the country's shops are at its lowest level since October 2021. And we'll have plenty more then for you from the ECB forum in Sintra, Portugal, starting with a first on CNBC interview then, the Bank of Latvia's governor, that's Martins Kazaks. You can catch that conversation 7:30 CET.
Ambition to me is about doing better.
I think ambition creates a pathway.
Best advice I can give to someone starting off a career is don't have a career, have lots of careers, try loads of different things.
Talk to people and put your ambition out there.
I don't feel that I've hit peak ambition because it's a learning journey.
CNBC is where ambition meets opportunity. What does living ambitiously mean to you? Hear it from our CNBC anchors, reporters and global business leaders on CNBC.com.
One might think that with all the political news that we have been following, that not much has happened on the economic front, but actually so many data points still to unpack. Even the JOLTS numbers coming out of the United States then tomorrow, we'll focus in on that. Even on the corporate front, still so much happening, and so much so that you're still seeing gains across then Wall Street. In fact, the NASDAQ, the tech-heavy NASDAQ, managed to find another positive session, closing at a record high again then yesterday, up 0.8% in that trading picture. Then investors deliberating whether that strong start to the year will continue. Well, it looks to have started that way, especially then with this market going higher so far this week. Then, of course, we are still looking to Fed Chair Jerome Powell's comments as well out of the ECB forum in Sintra, Portugal. Out of Asia, then, this is what's happening out of your market picture there. Then you're seeing the market out of Hong Kong then return from that holiday, going up 0.33%. Then is the Hang Seng Index. The Nikkei managing to move past 40,000 points, 378 points then gained so far this morning. The Nikkei seeing some positive global cues, then follow it on to that near 1% gain so far this morning. The Shanghai Composite is 0.1% to the good. Australia's market slightly lower there, following some economic data as well out of the market in Australia. European markets then, just interesting to follow on from yesterday's close. This is what you saw out of yesterday's closing picture. We're heading towards the UK's election, so a bit of nervousness, perhaps a flat stance there with some slightly positive bias then for the FTSE 100. The CAC 40, though, more than 1% higher on the day, but actually it had initially jumped around 2.5%, of course, following the first round of voting then out of France. So that has been very interesting to look at. We head towards the second round and we'll unpack that a little bit more, but interesting to take a look at that market overall. The likes of Italy and Spain also managing to move up more than 1%. What does the market look like today then across Europe following on from yesterday's uptick? Look like we could start the day a little bit more subdued, with negative bias then seemingly part of the trading picture so far. Karen.
Thank you for that, Arabile. Well, France's centrist and left-wing candidates have until today to decide whether to withdraw from Sunday's second round in the parliamentary election. President Emmanuel Macron's Rassemblement Party and the left's New Popular Front are facing calls to pull candidates who finished the first round in third place to avoid splitting the anti-national rally vote and prevent the far right from winning an absolute majority. Well, Charlotte has spoken to us in the past about how tactical the second round is. What do you think Macron does today?
Well, that really is the question out there, because we have, as you were saying, we have this record number of triangulaires, so the three-way runoffs, 300 of them out of 577 seats there, so huge number. That's because of the historically high participation. Yesterday, almost 67%, so the highest in almost 40 years. And the deadline is tonight at 6 p.m. Paris time on putting the final list of candidates, and the negotiations are all happening between yesterday and today. And look, about 100 candidates from the left-wing bloc, the Nouveau Front Populaire, have already stood down because they came third in the race in order to allow the other candidate facing the far-right candidate to get all their votes and block that vote. And the message yesterday that we heard from the presidential bloc, though, and that is where the controversy lies, is that is not that clear, and as clear as the message that came from the left. Gabriel Attal, speaking yesterday, said the objective was clear and that stopping the Rassemblement National from reaching an absolute majority was the key.
Today the main risk is that the National Rally achieves an absolute majority. And I speak of risks sincerely from my gut, because this would be a catastrophe for the French public. This project is the opposite of appeasement. It's a project that would fuel divisions among French people. I remind you that this is a project that aims to pick between those with a foreign background and those without. And furthermore, it would be catastrophic as well for the public's income, their jobs and their spending power.
But the message is not as clear from other voices from the presidential group, including Bruno Le Maire, the Economy and Finance Minister, who again yesterday saying he was ruling out calling on voters to choose far-left candidates if that was the only option. So he was talking about La France Insoumise in particular, calling that party a danger to the nation. There was the same message that we had from Edouard Philippe, who's a very popular politician. He was President Macron's first prime minister, and he said, not the Rassemblement National, not La France Insoumise. So here again, very divided message coming from Macron's camp there, and that's being the big criticism, kind of giving a bit of an end of reign kind of feeling, saying, okay, the leader of the party cannot even control the message from his own party, getting to this crucial phase here a few days before the second round. Now coming to Jordan Bardella, whose party of course came top in the first round of the election at 33% of the vote, where he said yesterday, again focusing a lot of his attacks on the left-wing bloc, which is the one that can challenge him, and he said that the left-wing bloc was an existential threat to the French nation.
This alliance has neither head nor tail, and I'm reaching out to all voters on the right, in the centre, and also the reasonable left, who don't want to see Jean-Luc Mélenchon become France's Prime Minister, because that would mean insurrection, chaos, and economic disorder for our country.
Now, interesting, Jordan Bardella said he would not accept to become Prime Minister if he doesn't reach an absolute majority. A lot of people are questioning whether he would actually really do that. But at the moment, again, the projection of the seats look like it could be hard for the far right to reach an absolute majority, but it's not completely out of the question yet, because they are very close, and the top end of the bracket is 270, so very close to 289 magic number, and they could reach maybe to a few MPs here and there to potentially reach that. And that's why there's all this game of negotiations between Macron's bloc, well, some of Macron's bloc, and the left-wing bloc to try and block them and have as little number of seats as possible there into the second round. But it's still very open there, so we'll have to wait and see what happens.
It's confusing, and everyone's throwing around the death of democracy, and this is the threat to democracy. They're all chucking it around. I noticed that as well. But what? I mean, I was going to kind of say, oh, why shouldn't they be given a chance to kind of form a government? But actually, my point really is here: if they don't get to their majority, the right-wing bloc, and where does that leave us in France? Because you've got the party that's won the most seats, that most French men and women, or not most, more French women and women want men and women than others, that they don't form a government, and then what do we do for the next couple of years? I mean, just pottering along with a president who's incredibly weakened as well, and no one really wants the poison chalice of forming a government.
No. So you would end up in that position where you have three blocks of around 30% each. Yeah. The far right, the left-wing bloc, and Macron and Les Républicains. That's around 30-30-30. None of them, well, that's the question. Does the Macron camp and the left-wing camp want to work together somehow? That's the question. Grand coalition is not something that exists in French tradition. So the next step would be, and some say that Macron might have to do that, is name some sort of technocratic government, which has never happened in France.
Well,
so France
Letta got a French passport because he's got experience. Has Monti got a French? They've done it a lot over in Italy.
Draghi has got a magical name.
Anyone got a French passport?
No, but that's the thing. That would be the next step down. That's never happened in France. that would be also kind of a bit anti-democratic, considering that France are screaming for a change of some sort. That would probably not be the right answer. But we are completely uncharted territory, and that's why some coalitions say, look, we need to make some sort of coalition, if not coalition, agreement, agree to disagree kind of coalition, because at the moment it's just a completely new situation, and we don't know what the outcome might be.
Thank you for listening to Squawk Box Europe Express.
For more market-moving news, you can head to cnbc.com.
Or join us again on the show with Steve Sedgwick, Karen Cho, and myself, Arabile Kumete, weekdays on CNBC.